r/AskReddit. What dark family secret/family history have you uncovered? My great-grandfather had 3 families. 2 in the States and 1 in Canada. How can anyone outside of the very well-off even begin to afford that? Not even affording it. Just the time management alone. My uncle got his wife pregnant at 17. He was 30 and that's why her family got so angry. I always noticed that my aunt seemed really young. When I grew up and did the math, I realized that my uncle impregnated her and married her when she was 14. He was 19. Cold been worse. Your uncle cold been 30. It's not exactly dark paressy, but my great uncle on my father's side is widely considered an idiot. So my dad's family are very recent immigrants from Italy, and I guess my great uncle decided he wanted to visit his homeland. He was born there, but raised in America. The problem was he apparently was completely oblivious to what was going on in the world. Because he went to Italy in 1938. He ended up getting drafted into the Italian military since he was born there. Unfortunately for him, he was completely unaware he didn't actually have to join the Italian military, as the US would have contested it had he tried to get into contact with an embassy or something. Luckily for him, he was only assigned to patrol around Italy, and Italy surrendered/turned on Mussolini before the Allies advanced far enough to encounter my great uncle. It was all apparently very awkward, since my grandfather and the rest of his brothers had been part of the US military and fought in Europe. TLDR, my great uncle is probably the only guy to accidentally join the wrong side of WW2. Edit, Paresi. I have shamed my Roman ancestors. I don't want to sound like an asshole, but is it possible your great uncle was not a dumb immigrant, but maybe a smart fascist? Good theory. My grandfather, white, may have fathered 1 or 2 kids with the black lady across the street. This was a big no-no in the southern US in the 1940s. Hey, at least he wasn't racist. Yeah. He was like duck racism. So he did. Not exactly dark. But after my grandpa died, we were going through his stuff and found an old letter. My white, very Christian, very conservative grandpa had gotten kicked out of college for organizing a panty raid and somehow no one ever knew. Of course. We framed the letter and it's now hanging on the wall of my grandma's house. I guess your family missed the panty raid. You're talking about girls, right? Girls? My mother told me a story about being at a small funeral in the late 1950s, East Texas. The deceased was mentally challenged, and the family was relieved to have the child at peace. During the service, the coffin began to rock, and crying was heard. Then she was taken outside and watched as the coffin was carried to the cemetery next to the church and hurriedly buried. I was telling my kids this years later, and my mother walked in the room, listened for a moment, and asked, "Are you telling them about Uncle Chucky? What? You seem to have forgotten to mention the connection before." Mom. Edit. I cannot swear to the authenticity of the tale, but my mother swore by it, and she was not the joking sort. It has caused a decent amount of dark brooding about being buried alive in my youth. This is actually one of the more ducked up things I have read on this thread. One of the most ducked up things I read on Reddit, and I have read some hidden here. My mother left her sister to die in an apartment when she should have taken her to the hospital for gastric bleeding or something to that effect. Mom still doesn't understand why she wasn't invited to the funeral services for her parents. She's a classic narcissistic money-sucking whore. Man. I hope karma exists, just for the purpose of making sure people like this get their comeuppance. How do we convert our virtual karma into real-world karma? When my mother died, I found out my uncle is really my dad. Mother's brother or father's? Father's brother. Apparently she got drunk and slept with my uncle one night before they were married. But she told my dad that I belonged to some other man, so he wouldn't be upset at the brother aspect. My uncle didn't know until she was dying. He went to visit her in the hospital, and she told him that I was his, and that she never told his brother. Then after she passed, he decided to sit me down and tell me. I told him it changes nothing. My daddy is my daddy. He still doesn't know, and if he does find out, it won't be me who tells him. He's my dad. My great-grandmother was a dirty Irish scamming whore. Sorry nanny. In WW2 she used to scam multiple American and British soldiers who would come to Liverpool to be sent to the European front all at once into marrying her. Then collect a percentage of their pay and pawn any jewelry she was given. She was the queen of dependence. Gam was a whore. Slut for money. I have a few. 1. About 80% of my family members are cokeheads. I found out after falling into the family habit right after high school and having a breakdown where I told my brother. Guess some habits are genetic. 2. My mother's aunt passed a few years ago. We went to Arizona for the funeral, which is where I met my mother's side of the family for the first time. I learned 2 things that day. I'm Irish, the family has IRA ties, and apparently my aunt had been murdered. A few hours after the funeral we were all in the hotel room catching up when one of my mother's cousins, who hadn't showed up, called from a payphone. He asked to be put on speaker and to have the kids leave the room. Since I had recently turned 18 they asked for me to stay. Turns out he found out that my now deceased aunt dealer had cut a coke with some kind of potion. He got a confession from the guy before he offed him and dumped him in the desert. He said he was sorry he couldn't be there but also said they wouldn't see him for a few years. He said he loved us. Apologized he never got to meet my brothers and I and hung up. No one has heard from him since. 3. My mother tried to abort me. She confessed this after an argument we had and said her life is better without me in it and that she doesn't love me. Apparently my Runcan father had found out. Showed up to the clinic, dragged her out by her hair, and told her that if she ever tried to abort me again he would kill her once I was born. Needless to say I won't cry when she finally odds and gets put in the ground. Edit. I never thought I'd get this much feedback. I appreciate all the kind words. It really does make me feel better knowing that there are people out there who have been through tough situations who were able to come out clean on the other side. It's depressing to say that that's only a few stories out of all the crap that's happened to me over the course of my life. Maybe one day I'll find a way to write it out and have it published like some of you guys have recommended. But for now, I'll just keep pushing forward. Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ. My great-grandfather was an artsy captain. Like pretty high up. He even had Heinrich Himmler himself over for dinner at one time, if I recall correctly. After the war was over he fled and got prosecuted. Not sure what happened to him after that. Did you check in Argentina? You missed the part where he got prosecuted. Usually means they got them. It wasn't necessarily a secret, but nobody talked about the picture on the mantle at my aunt and uncle's. I found out a few years ago that they had lost their oldest child, of 3, when he was 11 to leukemia. He had been my dad's best friend. Changed a lot about who they were and gave me new perspective on them. Sweetest people ever. But there is a never-ending sadness there. Parents should never have to bury their children. That's what cremation is for. /r/Jesus Christ Reddit. I just found out that my mother was divorced by my father via email while he was away working overseas at Sudan. Turns out my dad met his high school ex during work and decided to marry her. You know. First love and stuff. Soon after she received the email, she got dressed up, leave the house leaving me and twin brother alone, while being pregnant with my youngest sister, to fill in divorce papers at the court. Also, my mum struggled so much when she was financially broke after being divorced that she had to go house by house in my neighborhood just to ask for some money support from them. God knows what else she's been through. Edit. Please stop loathing my dad. I believe it was just a mistake. Something that he would done it anyway. And it just happens at wrong timing. Yes, both parties are doing really well. My mum have a very stable job RN. And my dad gets to do the business stuff that he always wanted to do. My siblings are adults ATM. All of us are basically able to handle things by ourselves. Thanks for the kind words. Your mom sounds like a very strong woman. Not a secret or anything, but my great-grandmother survived the Armenian genocide at some point by playing dead and hiding under dead bodies. That's tough. The hardest part is not laughing and giving away your position. Great-gramps was an artsy Took me a while to know for sure, but see either that or he owned an uncomfortable amount of Nazi memorabilia while alive. By any chance, did he have a painting of a German Shepherd? Edit. Holy hit Batman, I got gilded. Thank you kind sir, I can only assume you are Hans Vermut. Edit. To the German Shepherd painting is an homage to the episode of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia in which the grandfather of two of the main characters ends up being a Nazi with lots of war memorabilia, to include a painting of a German Shepherd. Ryan Gosling will play me in the movie Dude. My ancestors are from North India. Before the Indian partition, we were spread out all over Pakistan, Himachal, Kashmir, etc. I have 118 second cousins on my dad's side. He has 55 cousins. I only have 16 second cousins on my mom's side. I found out the reason that we had so few cousins on my mom's side is that all of my grandmother's family was massacred during partition. They lived in what is now Pakistan and didn't get across the border in time. She refuses to tell us how she escaped or how she ended up in India. She found her elder brother that lived in Himachal also had some family. On my maternal grandfather's side, a lot of his cousins died from disease. Also, I'm pretty sure that one of my great aunts was a Muslim who was forced into marriage as some form of vengeance. People in my grandfather's family were also killed during partition. There is a lot of blood on both sides. We live in the States now, but I'm still fascinated by these stories. Why do you think that your grandmother won't tell you how she escaped? I noticed your username is very fitting for this. I don't know. I think this was very traumatic for her, and she just didn't want to deal with dragging up these memories again. We had some idea of how she crossed a border. We think she went with one of her brother-in-law's families. As I said, our history gets very fuzzy around that time. Yeah, I created the username just for this question, haha. I didn't want it to be attached to my main account. My great-grandfather was a bootlegger, and later, allegedly a cannibal during the Great Depression. I say allegedly because his friends claimed it was a rumor he started to keep people from messing with his family. They could never disprove it, though, because even up to his death he swore he'd eaten the rival's liver. I should note he was a Native American, so he got the nickname Wen, short for Wendigo. My grandpa said it was all for show, though, cause Wen had to fight over things like milk and threaten the power company employees to keep them from turning the power off. I have no idea how much is true, cause it seemed to be embellished all the way up to my grandpa's death. Milk must have been serious ducking business in those days. From what I understand, it was often a big factor in staying well nourished. If the milkman didn't get paid, he didn't refill your bottles. If you were counting on milk to fill out your diet of bread and beans, it very well was a big deal, especially with a family to feed. My grandpa told stories of how he and his brother would often get paid a penny to guard the neighborhood from milk thieves. Edit. Coincidentally, after the Korean War, my grandpa actually became a milkman. Found out my father had a secret family and that we were it. His wife and kids don't know about us to this day. Also found out a while later that an uncle had an ex-wife and kids he kept quiet about too. Okay, but how does this work for taxes and whatever? I'm always curious how this works. Does the guy just not work? Or does he file separately because they are not legally married? Is he legally married to anyone? I have so many nerdy questions. Got a decent one, but the thread's 3 hours old, so fat chance it gets read by more than a few people. Still, I'd rather not link it to my account. Uncle John went off to WW2. He even participated in the D-Day landings. He comes back from the war alive and whole. Things are good for a while. Then suddenly one night his wife stabs him to death in his sleep. She confesses and says he snored too loud and it drove her crazy. Thing is, it wasn't his wife. His son was psychotic and mentally ill. She went to prison for the next 30 years for his crime of killing his father. Pretty ducking dark and only a few of us know. Ducking. Like and subscribe.